So, good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations on making it through the afternoon and being here for a regulatory, heavy, technically dense subject. At the end of 20 minutes, so we have 40 minutes together, we're going to talk about advocacy in action, influencing regulatory development and policy. We are going to touch the core of the 4 values that advocacy revolves around, the main participants in advocacy, and what can we do moving forward. So at the end of 20 minutes, it would be not fair to be in a room full of experts and not have the time to share a platform for discussing important issues. So I'll make it easier. We're gonna make it product category wise. So the last 20 minutes we'll keep for intersection and discussion. So meat and poultry category in the room, hands up. I'll make it easier for you to network for the 10 minutes so that we can have a fruitful discussion. Any meat and poultry product category in the house? Hands up, wide open so everyone can see that. Only one? Wow, what's popular here? Bakery and confectionery, beverage industry. Okay, so we have a good idea. Am I missing an industry? Dairy? Produce, yeah, we are big on produce in the circle today. Okay, so if you have a wide idea of where everyone is sitting, use the 10 minutes to approach your product category because we'll be talking about specific issues. So to go ahead, what does advocacy mean to us? What does advocacy in action mean to regulators? And what does it mean influencing policy decisions? So, I mean, we are at the center of consumers, industry, and regulators. I mean, in terms of us being regulatory professionals, we are at the center of this intersection where we are balancing consumer safety while maintaining compliance with the regulators and making sure that the decisions we make are strategic to the business that we are working for. So all in all, that being said, yes, we are at the center of that decision making. Sorry, I'm just trying to, okay, it works. We are at the center of this decision making, but also focusing on what are the tools that are available that we have to kind of be able to make these decisions in the best possible ways. And that's why the core values, the 4 core values around advocacy help us make those decisions in a more strategic manner. So when we talk about the core values, consumer safety comes first, with us being the consumer to start with. So when we say consumer safety first, do we have a scientifically based evidence, data-driven decision making that is benefiting the consumer? And while we are doing that, every decision that we make is building trust between the business that we are working for, the regulator, and the industry. Every time when we are trying to make a decision, it's important that this reality, the operational reality that we are trying to go through while implementing a policy stays true to building that trust between the regulators and the consumers. Now, that being said, we are on a daily basis, on a regular basis in our day-to-day, we are going through many gray areas in the fields that we work in. There are newer regulations. I'm sure the year of 2026, 2025, and the 2 years that are ahead of us bring in a lot of newer regulatory policies that the operational reality of most of them sometimes is not clear. That means there are many gray areas that are still up for discussion. Right from a policy ideation to its development, to its full framework completion, and then to execution, there are a lot of gray areas in between that we as operational heads or people in position who are solving regulatory issues realize it way after the policy has reached us. So what can we do at the beginning stages of a policy ideation before it becomes an operational challenge for execution and implementation and fulfillment? So the way to deal with those gray areas to be in close communication with your regulators. I'm sure there are not many industries where you have the privilege of having a CFIA office right in your building. Well, meat and poultry, and there are some privileged people that can have CFI support in the factory, but then we all know with changing inspectors, changing needs, constantly changing regulations, it's very hard to maintain a uniform approach and a uniform give and take in terms of communication with the inspectors. So how do we go through that? It is important that we keep a historical evidence database of what the facility has been through. When newer regulations come in, there are always exemptional areas based on the historical reality of your plant. And that's where we come into picture, where we can get all of this data together and have an evidence-based approach to a compliance timeline that we would not be able to match because it is not your operational reality. I will give a few examples, and we'll talk about like 3 main sectors that personally I have worked on in the past few months since the MAHA compliance, the FOP, and the FSMA 204 final traceability rule came into picture. So we'll dive deeper into that. But that being said, these gray areas, the only way is having a strong working group and strong communication with the regulators in your province, in your jurisdiction, that are going to help you get through it. So all of this, the gray areas discussion aligns well with the harmonization that we have been talking about. But when we talk about regulatory harmonization, how far have we come along, and how far are we from the reality of actually having harmonization in most of our regulatory policies and departments, especially products that have a very wide range of exemptions. In your day-to-day, like when you are trying to solve an operational flow chain, I want to talk about thresholds, let's say. When we talk about harmonization, there's tons and tons of data available in a wider global prospect. If we talk about the EFSA, if we talk about the Codex, there are already principles and databases in place that we could make good use of instead of reinventing the wheel for every province, for every federal state. And I think piggybacking on those databases that are already available will save us a lot of time, will reduce a lot of duplication that comes with going through the same set of rules for that area, even though the overall food safety risk for that product category remains the same. So when we talk about harmonization on a daily basis, I'll give you a quick example. When we talk about labeling regulations in the US and Canada comparatively, how many of us export to the US here? How many of us are exporting the US? So a lot of us. Now, when you have multiple lines running for your manufacturing a Canada-based product and a US-based product, we all know the operational realities of what goes on when these operations happen parallelly on a floor. There is a lot of risk and error of things that could have been totally avoided if regulations address the product category in the same line of framework. But that doesn't happen that often. The amount of recalls because of a labeling error that could have been easily avoided just because your lines are catering to different countries, for the exact product category, for the exact compliance set, you're doing 2 different type of declarations, you're doing 2 different type of, but again, the product remains the same, the process flow remains the same. And just because of 2 or 3 gray areas that you need to redefine, you have to completely follow different protocols for 2 lines with the same set of operators, which becomes extremely challenging. So this was just an example. So when we talk about the US exports and MAHA compliance and what has been going on in terms of consumer awareness from the US side, so the US consumer is now, because of the MAHA compliance, becoming more and more aware of processing conditions for ingredients, the kind of declarations that are on the label. So I'll just give you a quick example, the flour. Flour in Canada is pretty standardized. It's the bleached and unbleached versions were never a requirement of the label in the past in Canada. But because now MAHA compliance is into place, US clients are more and more forcing on having these processing conditions established. So this creates duplication because now you have an already approved ingredient, an already approved product, which you have to reapprove for the same product category, which is going to run parallelly on the same line in your manufacturing plant. So this is the kind of duplication that harmonization can eliminate. If one regulatory framework or a policy involves all of the blind spots of the neighboring nations. When we talk about global supply chain, you have ingredients coming from all parts of the world. And while approving these ingredients, it would be so good for the regulators to have a broader view of the countries that they are catering to. And harmonization just eliminates all of that double approving, double designing, double manufacturing standard setup that you could totally avoid. When we talk about, moving on from MAHA, when we talk about FOP transition and compliance and all, I know so many small, medium, big-sized companies that do not have a stronger forecast. We are talking about the wide knowledge gap and training and transition gap that exists between a small business, a medium-sized based business, and a big business. But all of them are subjected to comply to the same regulatory framework, necessarily not with the same amount of resources and training. So let's say a small-sized business with an exaggerated forecast might already have packagings forecasted and printed for the next 2 years. Yes, we had 2 years to comply. Most businesses had 2 years to comply to this date of FOP. But that being said, how many of them started late? And with the consumer trust in the regulators and the changing policies, small businesses do have an approach of, oh, let's get closer to the date. Things might change. That's why constantly changing regulations and framework could bring about a lack of trust in a consumer and the industry. So now when we talked about regulatory being in the center of this, where we are having consumer, regulators, and the industry to keep happy, we are in a very dicey situation where our decisions could create large-scale impact and waste. So when it comes to consumer safety, it's first. It's everything that everyone is working for, the business, the regulators, and us as professionals. But that being said, all of the blind sides of having this waste creation out of an FOP, which is not a food safety concern per se, but a broader picture. So when we talk about the overall objective of having FOP on a product pack, in terms of the regulator outcome of achieving what the regulators were trying to achieve with an FOP on a front pack, how far has the industry ever come? So closing that loop, that means while the policy is being ideated, it has a certain objective. And in the end of it, when we do have the results, that loop is seldom not properly closed with what is the consumer behavior now with this regulatory impact, and are there products that based on the consumer awareness, people would still consume because it comes into the leisure category. That product was never supposed to be a health-based product, and all of the categories in that sector of, for example, pizza, in spite of, it's very, very hard to have a healthy pizza with zero sodium content or a zero fat content. People consume that product exactly for those characteristics. So it's very hard to define a leisure product along with the other products that need that kind of compliance. So that is something that would be very interesting to watch after 2 years of FOP being finally completed and being in place. What is the industry and consumer is reacting in terms of what products do I choose? Am I really going to stop eating products that the entire category has the FOP compliance label on? So how am I differentiating? How am I reaching my objective of actually making the consumer aware while the law is never matching up with overall consumer consensus? We talked about FSMA4 traceability rule. The date of the compliance for this rule has changed 3 times in the last 2 years. And why is that? From the ideation of the policy to the launch, the government realized that as they started deploying the policy and started talking to more and more professionals like us, there are certain operational realities that were fully ignored in the ideation. For example, the convenience of where all of this data would live. In terms of the traceability rule, yes, again, there are small, medium, and big companies and suppliers that are catering to the US. When we talk about products on the FTL list and where this critical tracking events and key data elements will live, there has to be major changes made on several legacy systems to accommodate that change. And then those systems never have uniform information all across. That means supplier A would be storing this information on a completely set of different documentation than supplier B. And that's why it's being extremely hard for everybody working on the FTL list and getting to comply with the traceability rule. It's becoming so challenging to work with small-scale suppliers because they do not necessarily have the knowledge and resources. So what kind of help are the regulatory bodies really providing to these small businesses? That is questionable and something to think of. That being said, I mean, we could take the next 10 minutes to take that time to talk about what are the most pressing gray areas that you are going through in your product category. It's 15:32 p.m. right now. We reconvene in exactly 9 minutes, and we'll give you that time, and then we can have 4 summaries where we give the platform to discuss if there are any summaries or conclusions that you have gained from talking to your colleagues. So the stage is yours. We can start networking. Now, we don't have much time. You got 9 minutes. Okay, I guess time's up. That's a lot of passion in a room. Okay, can I have your attention back? Can I have your attention back, please? We have last 2 minutes left in the session. So, out of the crew, any hands up for a summary for what you discussed? We'll take 2 sides. Anybody from this side would like to share your thoughts? That was 9 whole minutes of chatter. A conclusion better come out of it. Anybody? Coffee, meat, produce. Go for it, Justin.
I didn't really talk about that exactly.
Can we have a mic, Frank? No pressure, no pressure.
So, which part do you want me to focus on?
The part that Anthony left you notes with, so.
So what Anthony was telling me about was how quality is moving towards collecting a lot of data. You guys have a lot of data to collect, and that it's hard to make sense of it, so that there's more and more engineers that are actually coming in to engineer this data to make sense of all of this data for the quality team and for the frontline teams. So we're really talking about how to make sense of everything that's happening today. And then the conversation got cut off.
But it's interesting. I have a question for you.
Yes.
I mean, you're an AI-based company,
Yeah.
so we are all here mostly label reviewers, regulatory professionals, and what most of us are advocating is AI cannot deal with the gray areas that we deal with on a daily basis when it comes to your own historical evidences of plan. So in the next 5 years, how do you think AI will influence regulatory?
It's really going to have to be, AI is like a little baby. I think we mentioned it before, but that it has to be trained. It has to know what to do, what not to do. And I think the quality team is essential to training these models for the future and having an influence on the outcomes of what AI is going to generate for the quality
That's
team.
where you go regulatory. Your jobs are not going anywhere because this system would still need us.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Go for it. Here.
So thank you. This was a great session. We were discussing that sometimes the policies come down from the regulatory bodies, but we would like to have more public consultations where QA managers like myself and others could provide more input to make them more value added. So you also mentioned about FOP. So as consumer, when you go to the market now, every bag of chips will say high sodium. Every chocolate will say high sugar.
I'm not going to stop having chips.
Exactly. So that's my point. Will you stop buying chips for your kids or for yourself? I don't think so. So was that FOP really value added, or is it going to be to a point where people will stop looking? So that's what we were discussing, and we're like, how value added is this? Is it value added at all? So maybe meaningful FOPs or meaningful.
Yeah, I concur. Product category should have been the focus of it rather than having every product face the same framework.
Thank you.
That was a good question. Anybody else? Last round. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Eva Evangelista. I work for Loblaw, and I can comment that, so we're doing this FOP thing. And there are some products which we cannot just reformulate because it will go against the standards of identity. So that's one thing. And to the point of, like, do the consumers really mind it? Because if it is my comfort food, I like a premium ice cream. I don't know, 15%, 18% fat. I like it, I enjoy it. Even if, like, it says high in fat, you live only once. Enjoy.
Well,
Yes.
that was a good conclusion. Yes.
And another thing too is, so my employer is big in transitioning into sustainable packaging. So we've been doing shelf life studies and everything, but then it impacts, some of them impact shelf life. So it's always kind of, okay, do we want to go with sustainable packaging? And what about if the shelves go empty? And at the end of the day, business is about making money, right? So it's always a contention of that. And it's like, okay, so I changed it to sustainable packaging, but if we don't declare it, and how is the consumers really going to know that instead of me putting it in the garbage, I should be putting it in a recyclable bin?
And the awareness around symbols.
Yes, and all at the same time, like, how are the communities ready in terms of these recycling centers, which I don't think the
that's true.
the government is not that ready.
There's not
to do.
enough subsidy or resources to support that.
Yes.
I agree. Well, thank you very much for your time. I leave you with one takeaway, that is YOLO. You only live once. But thank you very much for an engaging session. Thank you.